First of all, admit that we have a problem. I stand here today to give a voice to the many of us that feel a collective sense of despair. A nation that is demoralized and left with little hope. One of the biggest problems, Mr. Speaker, is that many of us believe that the laws that protect and govern this land is not applied equally in the same way to those in power. The truth is, many of us felt disheartened and betrayed when we watched the video of the Honourable Pio Tukandundua's assault by the Honourable Prime Minister within the precincts of Parliament. We then watched in disbelief and frustration as the institutions charged with upholding our laws dragged their feet. For weeks on end, many of us watched and waited as the responsibility was passed around like a game of rugby, from the police to the privileged committee, and in the end, the Honourable Prime Minister apologized and flew off to be a chief guest overseas, while the assaulted Honourable Pio Tukandundua got suspended for half a year without pay. Now the Parliament staff blamed for leaking the video, both lost their jobs at Parliament. Present in the gallery here today is Ilyasa Raindunduva, that former Parliament staff, and his dear sick mother who's watching from home. And I acknowledge the strength they have portrayed during this very challenging time and turning their adversity into positivity. I want to personally thank the kind donors who gave to the GoFundMe campaign to raise $8,200 for Ilyasa and his family. This was despite bad-hearted people trying to stop a genuine cause by reporting to GoFundMe that I was fundraising for myself. Finally, after 3 months of delays, I will be handing over those funds today, which will help greatly with their family expenses, especially to care for Ilyasa's sick mother and his small farm and market produce. God bless you, Ilyasa and family. And I want to say to those bad-hearted people, good will always triumph over evil, and the truth will always prevail. Now, Honourable Speaker, Parliament has no jurisdiction in hearing and determining criminal offences. Let me remind members of this House that Section 20, subsection D of the Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Act states that any person who assaults a member of Parliament within the precincts of Parliament is guilty of an offence. Furthermore, Section 32 states that a written authority by the Attorney General is to be given to refer the matter for prosecution. To date, the Attorney General has not issued that authority, which he rightly should do so as the next step after that Privileges Committee finding in the September sitting. This has left many of us to believe that the whole exercise by the DPP was aimed at letting the Honourable Prime Minister walk with a little more than an apology. Because of this, many of us have lost trust in the custodians of those laws, the government. The truth is, when citizens believe that police do not investigate and charge leaders and those that are in authority to the same standards as ordinary citizens, it is a problem, and many of us lose trust in that institution. The Commissioner of Police was reported in the Fiji Times for calling for support. Those attacks on police are wrong, and my heart goes out to the police officers' families. But how can the Commissioner expect to get support from the public if many of us believe that the police torture and kill suspects without being fully prosecuted? Or if they are convicted, get suspended sentence and are out in no time? That's the problem. Support must be given to be received. The 2016 Amnesty International report on Fiji states that beatings, rape, sexual violence, attack by police dogs, and even murder are being used by the disciplined forces with impunity. Disciplined forces who commit human rights abuses rarely face prosecution because Fiji's 2013 constitution entrenches immunities for any government action between 2006 and 2014. And even when these officials are convicted of crimes, they are often quickly pardoned and released from prison. Now, the problem is that none of this including the recent injustice of the torture and abuse of the 16-year-old child by the military, were mentioned by the delegation to the UN Human Rights Council just 2 weeks ago. His Excellency the President quoted our children endearingly how they felt about the Constitution. But has anyone asked that 16-year-old child how he feels about the Constitution? The Acting Chief Justice, Kamal Kumar, the DPP, Christopher Pride, the Police Commissioner, Sithiben Ngiliho, appeared before the UN Human Rights Council to defend Fiji's laws that were heavily criticized by other nations, including the US Ambassador to the United Nations, Anna Palladino, for not allowing trade unions the right to rally and assemble. Listen, Minister, I know because I have waited time and again with my union brothers and sisters for a chance to exercise our democratic right to march and advocate for the $4 minimum wage and workers' rights, which, by the way, the people are still waiting on a year later, Minister, of the so-called wages review to happen. Where is that? Waiting. But this problem will not stop us. It will not deter us.
Honourable members, stop carrying out a conversation with someone else through me. Don't forget to speak.
Mr. Speaker, the workers of this country stand in solidarity to press on and demand the democratic rights to assemble and the freedom of speech to fight against poverty, to fight for our poor, to increase the minimum wage and change our labor laws to be fair and just to workers. We shall not be moved. The mere fact that the Chief Justice, the DPP, the Police Commissioner appeared together to represent and defend this government at the UN Human Rights Council, that's a problem. It does not augur well in the belief that these institutions are independent of the government. The same institutions that are supposed to uphold the rule of law above anything or anyone. The economic and moral fabrics of our nation are tearing at the seams, weighed down by the people's loss of trust in it. Now, economically, there is a problem because the government had to cut about $1 billion from the budget. This is a huge failure by the Minister for Economy. A 25% budget cut? If he was the CEO of a company, he'd be fired already. The economic crisis we find ourselves in is because this government's reckless spending in the last 12 years, something that it cannot always blame previous governments for. You are in the third term of your government. You are the previous government. Now the problem is that the government is desperately in financial trouble just from looking at all the austerity measures and cuts to almost every sector in our economy. We all know because many of us are talking about the hikes in new taxes and fees and the government service charges. The reduction and delay in service delivery in the public service meets the common excuse, no money. Businesses are losing faith in the government with overly aggressive tax audits by FICAC and FRCS, with every major decision bottlenecking with the Attorney General. As we say in our Maitauke language, the problem is the Attorney General doesn't even trust his own ministers to make their own decisions. The problem is we have a lawyer running the economy. That lawyer has failed and he should resign. Let the economist, Minister Reddy, run the economy. Many businesses do not really see the continued economic growth that this government likes to boast about. All they see is that it is not easy doing business in Fiji. The ease of doing business world ranking of Fiji dropped from 43rd in 2008 to its lowest point, 102nd this year. With so many hindrances to doing business in Fiji, it's no wonder that many great investment plans don't eventuate. Now, the Fiji government, in its desperation to accept any investment plans, has in some cases compromised the checks and balances required in vetting them. The Malolo Island environment catastrophe was one, But most shocking has been the revelations highlighted by the recent Al Jazeera story on Grace Road. Let's talk about Grace Road. This extensive news report uncovered the intimate connections between the Grace Road Church and this government. In it, the report alleges that Grace Road has been given lucrative government contracts, including renovations to the President and Prime Minister's residences. Those reservations have happened, and yet the landowners who leased the Ndeumba land with the promise of a school are still waiting. Ask them, ask the landowners.
Order.
The leader of Grace Road Church, who has been convicted in Korea for human rights violations, boasted to one day rule through politics in saying that Fijians are not very smart and that they will conquer government, govern and rule. These are seditious statements. For the government to issue a statement defending these seditious statements as possibly doctored by a very reputable media organization like Al Jazeera, and the lack of urgent attention to the torture and beatings of human beings happening on our soil without proper investigation, this is fueling the public's declining confidence in the investment initiatives of this government, as well as the maintaining of law and order by the very institutions that the public depends on to protect us. We are left with no choice, Honorable Speaker, but to turn to our people for their voice to be heard. I just cannot sit here in this house and pretend everything is normal, where because of the love of money, organizations like Grace Road Church are allowed to operate and be guarded. I intend to bring a petition to the people. During the February sitting, I'm calling for a parliamentary inquiry to fully investigate and suspend all operations until investigations are finalized. We must protect our workers. We must protect our people. We must protect our country. We must take the necessary steps as Parliament, the highest authority of this land, to address this problem. Many of us, including most recently former Nassori Mayor Motilal, have questioned if the hundreds of millions of dollars spent on infrastructure and roads have been fully accounted for. We look at the Lovo-sized pit potholes and wonder if the Roads Authority used its budget to cover the surface of the roads just in time for the elections, instead of digging it up and providing foundation to last. Now the rains continue to wash away the thin top layer of government efforts to reveal the big holes in their promises. The problem is that the only road that the government is heavily protecting and invested in is Grace Road. Another reason why our roads are constantly in disrepair is due to the large amount of vehicles this government floods Fiji with. Why is this government continuing to flood the market with cars? Cars that continue to cause traffic jams, spanning many kilometers, adding to the polluting smog in the mornings that cannot simply be cocked away. Consultations are underway for the Climate Change Act. Is this just another avenue to access money, yet we do not do the necessary at home to mitigate the effects of climate change? As the Shadow Minister for Environment, this is a problem. Is it because customs duty collected from imports like second-hand vehicles accounted for the second highest source of government indirect tax revenue collected? In 2018 alone was a whopping $666 million. The other ways in which the government is raising revenues to dispose of government assets, such as EFL, to the tune of nearly $400 billion. Time will tell if corporatizing these national assets will result in the selling off of our children's future. Now, government's desperate attempts to grab cash is falling short and leaving holes in our national budget as big as those found on our roads. Our people are struggling. Our businesses are struggling. Increased lawlessness, drug abuse, sexual violence. These are a result of a government that is losing control. With due respect, it's all very well for His Excellency the President to quote children about how they feel about the Constitution. But what about our many children who face the daily struggles of poverty, who fall victim to physical violence and neglect because of the stresses of meeting daily needs? The many children who fall victim to sexual molestation and sexual violence because they are the most vulnerable, most innocent and easiest targets. Morally, many of us have lost trust in the government's ability to protect our children, our women, our citizens, to maintain law and order with the widespread use of drugs and the backlash of the public to torture by the disciplined forces. In most of these cases, the police and the Fiji Human Rights Commissioner, Ashwin Raj, tells us the investigations are ongoing. Many of us still waiting in vain for justice. The widespread and shocking use of hard drugs like meth, especially by our youth and children. The Honorable Prime Minister talks about protecting our youth and children and propping them up. This is a huge problem that begins with opening up our borders to criminal elements, a poor reflection of this government's immigration and border control policies. As a shadow minister for Labour, I get inundated with disheartening reports about the effects of government running out of money. I was recently informed that teachers and some civil servants are not getting paid on time. A delay of a single day for us may be nothing, but for those receiving wages can be very stressful on a family living from paycheck to paycheck. I've been informed of situations where interest rates have drastically increased with moneylenders and credit institutions, leading to extreme cases where high-purchased household items are repossessed. In some credit institutions, there are public notices displayed that loans will not be given to civil servants because they are unreliable debtors. So how do we as leaders of our nation, as Parliament, solve this problem? It's simple. The government should resign. It has failed our people. 13 years now, 13 years too long. But the government obviously not too prepared to admit that there is a problem and to resign.
Order.
So, you're not going to resign, then the government must show us, respect the rule of law and apply the law equally. That would be upholding the 2013 Constitution they so proudly flaunt. Our prayer here in Parliament, Honourable Speaker, the trust the people who sent us here, this has been broken. Until this becomes clear, many of us will never fully trust this government, ever. Secondly, this government needs to include us, the people, in their decision-making process. Not talking about token representation on standing committees. I'm talking about a genuine attempt to work together. It's not just your problem anymore now. It's our problem. We have to solve it together as a nation. This nation is in deep trouble. I feel that the coming days will be dark and trying. My prayer, Mr. Speaker, that is why I cannot support the motion before the House. And it is my prayer, Mr. Speaker, that we all stand together united in this bold attempt to face it. Because if we don't, listen, if we don't, we will drown individually in a tidal wave of national debt that not even a World Bank loan can save us from. May God bless Fiji. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.